Hi, and welcome to the Internet of Senses podcast. My name is Samantha G. Wolfe. I am the founder of Pitch Forward. I'm an NYU adjunct professor. I've written a couple books, and now I'm the host of the site portion of the Internet of Senses podcast. Today, I'm here with Casey Sapp, who is VP of Strategy and Emerging Technologies at VideoRay. He has spent most of his career focused on mixed reality and perception solutions for underwater creation from companies like Blue Ring Imagining, acquired by VideoRay, and VRTUL. He's invented multiple solutions, including the world's first 360 3D underwater camera system, Underwater 360 Livestream, and the highest resolution underwater camera system in the world. So effectively today, we're going to be talking about using innovative tech to see underwater. So thank you for joining, Casey.
Thanks, Samantha. That is my favorite topic, and I don't get to talk about it enough.
How about we start a little bit at the beginning of like what fascinated you first about kind of that seeing underwater? And I'm sure that there's different ways of putting it, but because we're on the site related podcast, that's how I'm going to phrase it right now. But what first started?
I mean, the genesis goes back to a kid. I was a swimmer and water polo player and diver. And when I was around the ocean, it just didn't feel like work. It just felt like fun. And my grandfather, he was an entrepreneur. I wanted to be an entrepreneur myself. He gave me terrible advice to, if I wanted to be an entrepreneur, to go study and be an accountant. And I see that now. I understand that being, the language of business, but you couldn't go further from entrepreneurship becoming an accountant. And so that set me back a few years, but I got, a really good financial background in my early 20s, and through just family history and some of the life experience I had, it was very important to me to find work that I loved to do. Not only that I was good at or could be paid for, but I enjoyed. And I ended up traversing a few industries until I got into perception and robotics and ocean technology. There's this triumvirate that I'm like really happy with now, which is growth technology companies, the ocean, and emerging technology like multimodal interaction and mixed reality and AI and perception. And that's where I'm going to be for the rest of my career. But to get there, I had to go through finance and education technology and Hollywood. And now I've landed into this industry, serving primarily defense customers who invest in R&D and long-term vision and hard problems. And I really like this customer in this industry, as we get to, be, I think, quite ambitious and focus on, 10 to 20 years out in kind of the applied research realm, rather than Hollywood, which when I was there, they would write a check and want something turned around in 3 to 6 months. And that was always a little bit anxiety inducing, but definitely allowed me to cut my teeth.
Like one little thing, I actually have played water polo and I used to be a springboard diver. So when you
Oh,
say
nice.
I was on swim teams for a very long time, I was known as like Sam the diver in high school. So, but I'm thinking you're probably talking underwater diving, not necessarily above water diving.
Yeah, scuba diving. Yeah, I got my first certification when I was 14 with my dad, and I've been on a few hundred dives now. When I was in Hollywood, I was a professional underwater cinematographer working for National Geographic and BBC and Shark Week and Discovery. And I had a really good time with that and was able to get a lot of really cool trips paid for and experience things that other people didn't. But ultimately now I'm running a technology company in charge of strategy and building concepts that are somewhat more universal to marine robotics.
Yeah, no, amazing. And that was my grade school. I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer. So we've hit many, and then now in emerging tech. So we're aligned in that way. So I know that we're gonna get to some of the stuff that you're working on now, but can you talk a little bit about that sort of Hollywood experience, the 360 underwater camera, especially since I think maybe people might not quite understand some of the differences of being able to try to shoot underwater versus somewhere else.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about career and then differences of underwater and then maybe even differences of Hollywood versus industrial, which is
Yeah.
also has its unique flavors. So I got into mobile learning back at the beginning of the iPhone, and I was really interested in democratizing access to information and remote learning. And I loved the idea of equitable, universal digital education, and that you didn't have to go to school to earn a credit to become good at what you do. And I think nowadays I'm realizing that if there is a degree for it, it's maybe you're probably getting in too late, and you should be working on things that colleges don't have degrees for in many respects, because that's where the opportunity is. And then I put a headset on. Palmer Luckey had the DK1, and I, tried Chris Milk's experiences and remember just this whole new world of access to experience that was now cost effective and affordable. And knew it was going to take a while because I mean headsets have all kinds of issues around how long you can have them, heat, power, cost. I mean
And you're like, I'm
the
going to
things.
take this camera that's
Yeah,
still being built and I'm
yeah.
going to put it underwater, basically.
Well, what happened was I didn't realize I could make money underwater. I didn't realize that there was a venture for me in around the ocean. And so I was thinking about there was a company called VRTUL before YouTube that I started a company and hired a few engineers and bootstrapped the idea of distributing content. And I realized that was kind of a second order problem. The first order problem was creating content, and there wasn't any content to distribute. And I became an agency and got into Hollywood and started creating content in all different industries. And New York Times hired me in 2015 to do a 360 piece. So there was no underwater camera to use. And it was right actually when there was a GoPro design that was coming out, but it had all kinds of flaws, and got the piece done. But I was like, wow, I could make money around the ocean. I could build a new camera. I could solve some of these problems. And it's just like James Cameron says, once you do the first film, once you produce something, it doesn't matter the cost. You can just start calling yourself a director after that, and negotiating your fee. And so I became the underwater expert after one film. But then I got into prototyping, and I got into design and engineering and system architecture, and partnered with these companies, first with Michael Muller, and created a series called Into the Now. And we went around the world to 12 destinations and had this black magic design. I ended up working with billionaires and OceanX and Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, did education, science, entertainment with Good Morning America, storytelling, MSG Sphere, SeaWorld. And there were all different types of camera systems that I developed, really, I think over probably 40 or 50. Many of them were just held together with bubble gum and rubber bands, and they worked
Something
for
to
that
make it so that
specific instant.
won't it won't like be destroyed, right? I mean, those were not inexpensive pieces of
It
equipment.
would, yeah. I mean, it'd be I'd pay $100,000 to get it built, but it wasn't anything that was easily understood or could be used by anyone else. And so it was very technical, but I was able to create a camera system that could shoot 100 million pixels. I was able to create a 360, live stitching camera that could stream to New York. There was one that did 3K by 27K. That's what it was, in a full 360. And 27K essentially was the screen's almost as tall as the Empire State Building. And we would do these projects and build these camera systems in less than 3 months. Put our reputation on the line. It was unproven, and then you throw it in the water and just pray that it worked, because your financial backing was behind that, and they were paying for the file. They weren't paying for the system. They weren't buying that.
Well, it's like
But
sending something into outer space, but instead of sending it into outer space,
yes,
sending it like deep underwater, and and you're like, all the work you've done, now you have to prove that it actually does work, in
Yeah,
those
and
situations.
yeah, and when you take a camera underwater, there are optics considerations. You have to put it behind a dome. The field of view changes based on the size of the dome. There's heat, there's power, there's global controls, there's weight, there's portability, there's cost, there's time, and all those things play into like what's good enough, what meets the threshold to be able to achieve the goal, and not have that one thing that kills the project or is a non-starter, or doesn't allow it to get on the plane. I had a blast. I had to learn quickly, but it was quite difficult. It was quite strenuous, and it was kind of my boot camp for perception for a number of years. And then the Navy saw what I was doing and saw that being a way to increase situational awareness for ROVs and robotic vehicles, and being able to put cameras on all sides of the vehicle and have this common operating picture. And so they took some of those concepts, created a solicitation through something called an SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant. I found out about it last minute. They didn't craft it because of me. They crafted it, having seen my work online, and won that, and through that ended up winning a number of different other defense contracts, built some IP, proved out some concepts, and then ended up selling this company, Blue Ring Imaging, about 9 months ago to VideoRay, who I work with now. And
But so
the
let's
jump,
go
yeah.
back a little bit just to understand, obviously if you're going to take one of these cameras or camera systems and you put it into the water, like, one, we're talking about, like, you don't want to get electrocuted, and you also now have, but it's like beyond that, you don't want it to just turn off, you don't want it to, not get wet, but there's more to it than that, right? There's other kinds of technological advancements and technologies that you're dealing with in order to get that right kind of imagery, especially at that high quality. Can you talk a little bit about that, those kinds of problems?
It's all about trade-offs. And if you're going to shoot something high resolution that's greater than 8K and 360, there isn't a camera out there that does that. And you don't want to have you know 8K red cameras or REs that are stitched together, as that's going to be a 400-pound rig and $1 million. And the wider the cameras are apart, the more disparity you have, the harder it is to stitch. And so you have to figure out what is the smallest camera that shoots the highest resolution, that can be controlled and customized with software to synchronize and handle metadata and globally control them. Because underwater, one of the biggest issues too is white balance. And if you set these cameras to make decisions on their own automatically, the white balance in the ISO just goes nuts because of light and depth and color, and you'll never have a uniform ish color between an image between these cameras. And so global control is like extraordinarily important and very hard to do, because cameras generally weren't made for them to have global control infrastructure. And I begged GoPro to work with me on this and to make it easier. There's a reason why their stock is at $1.50 right now, because they just like missed the boat significantly, because the size was great and the cost was great, but they just didn't have a desire to improve the access to the controls and allow you to get to the board. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can have above water, you can have a 220-degree lens, from Izugar, for example. They make these fisheye lenses, but underwater, you only get 175. You're 170 at best. So you can't have cameras that are back to back in the same way. You need more cameras. You need more power, more more everything. And that's when things get out of hand really quickly, and why you don't see a lot of people in the space trying to figure this out.
Right. Now, can you also talk about, like, the sensory technology, right? And the integration of the sensory technology, because it's not the same right now, right? For above ground versus, you know, under the water.
Yeah, I mean, I think where you're going with that is that an RGB, what we'll call maybe visible light sensor, can only see so far underwater because of turbidity, what they call snow underwater, and light. You're getting a few feet to a few meters of distance that you can see, and that's just not enough to do the work that's needed underwater.
That
It's
couldn't be
uh,
enough above water if you're like, well, we have these amazing cameras. They're 360 degrees,
yeah.
but you can only see this far. People would be like, what?
Right. So in Hollywood, we're looking for pristine conditions. We're going to the best and, most beautiful coral reefs in the world. We're choosing environments that are very attractive to dive and to experience. But in the industrial space, in oil and gas and in aquaculture, in survey inspection, critical infrastructure, defense, you can't see anything until you're right there. And so underwater, you're using sound, you're using sonar, you're using USBL to communicate, and trying to reconstruct the picture the way a dolphin would or a stingray, through different novel types of sensing mechanisms that get you to where you need to go. Then you can use the camera to perform manipulation or do photogrammetry. But sonar is the main sensor that is utilized in subsea robotics, and that's got a number of pros and cons to it. But in terms of storytelling, it's not that great.
This part of all this is kind of mind blowing to me. I mean, I love integrated senses in general, but you really have to integrate sound and sight. I mean, you're pulling the two of them together. What would be, even if you just did like a simplified version of like what that's like, especially for people that maybe don't understand all the technology. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm working on now and not what Hollywood cared about. But it's important to build a long distance, high fidelity, common operating picture that understands geometry and distance in 3D space. And sonar captures some of that to some extent, but it doesn't capture color, and it's not millimeter accurate per se. And cameras can do that, and so in lidar to some extent can do that. And so it's very important through metadata and through the synchronization of these sensors, and utilizing all aspects of the vehicle to go through to do a survey, to follow a pipeline, and utilize both sensors and fuse them together, preferably in real time, to get the best picture for review. And maybe that means you're trying to understand um, the health of a reef. You're trying to understand the rust on a pipeline. You're trying to identify objects in the sand. Sonar can get you close, but you really need to fuse multiple types of sensing mechanisms together, and that's not easy to do or cheap to do at the moment. And these are all different companies that are building different technologies that have different file formats that you're trying to combine together on a small vehicle and go and do these mission sets. And we're trying to bring down the cost, make it easier to understand, require less training, make sure that there's more on the back end for QA and being able to scrub the data. And there's just an infinite number of problems to solve underwater that I think maybe, Tesla and some of the companies that have more cash are solving internally, but really no one in the subsea space has the team and the money to solve all of this at once.
Okay, so you're basically taking and connecting all these different technologies to get rid of some of that, what you would have on land-based capture, some kind of static, and because you need to be able to see. You need to be able to see what's actually happening. And I think that if, you know, could you use a GPS, or does that not kind of work when it comes to underwater exploration and monitoring?
Yeah, so I mean, like above water, you can use the infrared spectrum, and underwater, you cannot. Above water, you have low cost LiDAR. Below water, you have expensive LiDAR. And above water, you have GPS. Below water, you don't have GPS. And through different methodologies of relative positioning and subsea slam, if you can see the bottom, or being able to localize yourself against some fixed known position, you have some sense of GPS. There are a lot more kind of creative ways that you have to back into localization, and so there's no high fidelity map underwater that's even a meter accurate, let alone millimeter accurate, that we can import and give to our operators and our customers. And maybe there are in certain places, but that usually is IP. That's usually not commercially available, and so that's a problem that's going to need to get figured out over a long period of time. And I remember working on the math and hearing this from a friend that to map the ocean at a meter accuracy, I think we would need like over 1,000 autonomous underwater vehicles running perpetually for over 250 years. And so like we just don't have the resources or the need, frankly, to go do that everywhere. And so GPS is there are different ways that we're trying to derive that, but ultimately, if you can either see the bottom or have something what's called USBL, or ultra short baseline, you can position yourself against maybe a boat or some structure and then get a GPS coordinate. It's just a different language. It's a different way of thinking than terrestrial and aerial. And, we're a little bit further behind, but I think that's what I like about it. It's hard, it's niche, and you really got to be passionate about it because the market just isn't as big.
Right. Well, it reminds, when you said position against boat, I keep on thinking like augmented reality or any of the sort of metaverse spatial tech, that they're like, so we can position it against the building, but then the building is going to be there, whereas the boat is going to move. So you have even that kind of, difficulty. So one of the things when I was doing the research around interviewing before meeting you was learning about this entire kind of ecosystem called the blue economy. And for those who are listening or watching who don't know what it is, can you help explain it, and maybe like explain sort of where you fit within it? Because obviously you're not sort of all of the blue economy, but maybe just an important part of it.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert at the blue economy, but it really is any business that touches the ocean. And when I think of the blue economy, I think of all aquaculture and therapeutics companies, trying to develop new compounds for vaccines. I think of shipping, I think of logistics, but I think of usually more of an altruistic type of business that is more focused on feeding people and healing people, and for the betterment of society rather than maybe oil and gas. But at the end of the day, I think it's an overarching term. It's about making money around the ocean, and we just frankly aren't doing enough. It's super niche. It's very hard. It's very expensive. It's untapped, and so to that extent, the blue economy has a very high ceiling in the future. For example, if we solve wireless communication underwater, you can just imagine the number of data centers that could be stood up, the amount of people that could have more tetherless vehicles and subsea residency and things, because when you can't communicate, once you go down, you're gone, and that comes with all types of financial risk. But I would say that I'm a part of the blue economy, and that it's just a really fun space to be in.
A lot of this is around the monitoring, right? If you can't sort of use GPS in the way that you would use GPS typically if you can't see that far, like the different possibilities of like monitoring things like fish or items or whatever. I feel like there's so much that we are just being able to do, right? Is that fair to say, or what? I mean, you are the expert here.
Yeah, I mean, everything's harder underwater. Everything's more expensive, and there are a lot of untapped resources, and there's a lot of opportunity, across all sectors. But there's just limited capacity to communicate, to share data. It's dangerous. It's cold. It's inherently risky. It is like going to space to some extent, and because of that, the economics are different, and a lot of people would just prefer to do things on land, but it's
But
fun.
you love it, right? I
I
mean, it
love
feels
it.
like you love it. So what is it that could get like somebody sort of inspired by, I guess, the possibilities here in terms of some of the technology that you're working on and the technologies you're working on with the company that you're part of now?
Yeah, I mean, someone who would want to be a part of the blue economy is certainly, being around the ocean and seeing its wonder, and seeing all of the creation that, not many people get to experience, at a maximum. And maybe people see a few fish at an aquarium. And I think that, the problems that need to get solved are really what drive me. And so it's a mixture of adventure and just, frankly, just sheer difficulty that, people are, running into, just the physics of the ocean. And so I think with that, creating intelligence, doing what Tesla and Waymo and Cruise are doing, the autonomy sector. We're 10 or 20 years behind to some extent, but we see what's possible. We see, what can be done, and we just need to modify that, and work within the bounds of the ocean to make this possible. So I get excited when I see, technology companies in Silicon Valley, really pushing the edge around robotics. And then I think about, where we're going to be in a decade, and
I
and
love
and
robots. I
who's,
mean, I
yeah.
I love robotic. And then so there's a thing called an ROV, and what's an ROV and how does that kind of apply to this area of sort of underwater site?
Yeah, so there's a few acronyms that, as you're getting into the space, are important to understand. You have USV, unmanned surface vehicle. You have AUV, autonomous underwater vehicle. You have ROV, remotely operated vehicle. You have hybrids of that. And then you have UUV, underwater unmanned vehicle, which is more of an overarching term for anything that's
Tech people
unmanned.
love their acronyms. They love
I
their
know, I know.
acronyms.
It and I like the ROV space a lot. And an ROV typically has a connotation of something which is tethered, has more control, more thrusters, looks less like a torpedo, maybe more like has a humanoid factor to it. It has manipulation, it has really high fidelity sensing. And it is what I consider to be more of like a helicopter versus an airplane. It's an AUV is something that would traverse a long distance, do a survey, capture a large swath of space to understand what's on the bottom, do the profiling, where an ROV is doing what humans do. It's replacing divers to some extent and transforming the way human work is done underwater. And it has the same capabilities and peripherals that give it a humanoid type of form factor. So it's got arms, it's got eyes, it's got, the ability to control itself in any column of the water, and do work. And I think that, there's those are a lot more complicated autonomy problem sets to have a vehicle sense, localize, control, cut, neutralize, and do that, all without a human in the loop. And right now, we're VideoRay is focused on both, more performant teleoperation to, have humans in the loop and, control the vehicle as if it's a human, but not so different than maybe Pacific Rim. That's definitely one of the mixed reality projects I'm thinking about. But long term, you just want to cut the cord, throw it, set it and forget it. Have it make the same decisions that a human would, and then come back. And we're a long way from that. But I think that's a really ambitious vision that I get excited about.
So is that why the defense industry becomes interested in these kinds of technologies? Again, sort of for those who are listening who don't know that much about the defense industry, and this whole underwater site is new, why so much investment?
It's a big question, but if you look at the macro factors here, less people are joining the military. It's harder to recruit. They're missing their numbers. You'd rather lose 1,000 robots than one human. From a public relations perspective, you can lose an infinite number of robots, but if you lose a person, that gets on the front page and has more of an emotional tie to it. And there are just, a lot of reasons why we want robots on the front line, both from a defensive and offensive perspective, because some of these are just very dangerous jobs that people shouldn't be doing, and robots can do them 24/7. They can do them,
and like extreme colds, I would imagine, like extreme cold, extreme depth, extreme, like, and for longer periods of time.
Yeah, exactly. So like the economics of, Waymo doing, delivering pizza, with that being a $300,000 car, it's hard to see how Waymo is going to break even, and it's hard to see, when they're going to become profitable. But underwater, to get a commercial diver underwater, it's like minimum 100 grand. And so replacing these types of roles, can become quite profitable, and really makes sense from an economic perspective, that you can save a lot of money having, a robot do it. And you don't need the same type of insurance. You don't need the same type of team infrastructure. And so there's just a lot of opportunity to replace humans with robots. And
It's not even replacing, because it's not like,
augmenting.
to me, it's sort of like, if you're going to go to extreme depth, which is like at some ridiculous temperature, and you need to do something there that is for national safety, be very broad, you're not going to be able to send a person down there for multiple days. Whereas if you're
That's
sending
right.
a camera with robotic arms that can work there remotely, you're actually supplementing and expanding what's even possible using sort of humans, probably either in the boat, I don't know, or on land, and going like, okay, we can now solve for a thing that we couldn't have solved without these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole topic around the economics of war that's really interesting to me. That, war today and its future is more about bleeding out budgets and governments rather than human lives. But, something that is not really well understood in the public space is that the US and somewhat the Soviet Union and Russia have had free reign over the ocean, being able, and mostly us, being able to have nuclear submarines, which are like a mobile missile silo, and it can show up 1 mile offshore without anyone knowing it's there, and do a lot of damage. And I think that's kept a lot of countries at bay. And now we have China and other countries that, have analog technology, and they're reaching the same level of capability that we are. And the goal is now to keep nuclear submarines, out of each other's waterways, but it's also to find the other person's nuclear submarine and, destroy it at a lesser cost. and we would prefer to do that with unmanned vehicles, right? And you see pipelines getting sabotaged. You understand that 99% of the world's data goes through undersea cables between continents. And when those cables were put down, there was not a whole lot of consideration how we protect them and what happens if someone can reach them and cut them. And there are all types of initiatives happening at the moment of how we use robots to, constantly inspect, survey, play defense against other nuclear submarines and find them. And, ultimately, just like we're seeing with the Houthis, like we're seeing with Ukraine, it's $100 drone taking out a $2 million tank. It's a $10,000 drone that's being taken out by a $2 million Tomahawk missile. Like, these disparities have a long-term impact, and countries are constantly trying to find the arbitrage opportunity underwater, and robots are a big place for that.
Being able to, see further and better, right? I feel like that in and of itself applies not just in that kind of safety and security space, but you were saying some of the scientists and figuring out sort of like what is happening to be able to predict things. If you can start measuring, then you can start predicting.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing further and better is very important because we can't almost see anything at the moment. There are no maps. There's very little understanding of change over time. And, we're seeing companies that are doing more data as a service, like Saildrone, for example, and sending larger fleets out to, do mapping of the Arctic or Caribbean, handle illegal fishing. But it's not anywhere of where it needs to be at the
Right.
moment.
But that's why you're an innovator, right? That's why you're
Mhm.
trying to predict the future and see the future. I found that too, that when I try to predict the future of certain things, that I end up going like, gosh, this is amazing. Oh no, this could go wrong too. Like, and it's trying to keep yourself balanced with both. And if you want to continue to sort of keep seeing ahead. But I find this so fast. It just, it's been a little bit of time sort of thinking about outer space, and then now, you know, trying to think about this entire thing that is on Earth. Like, you don't have to leave Earth, and you're trying to track and monitor and see, what's coming. So we've talked definitely a bunch about the technology. A little, I want to sort of like circle back just quickly and ask that very, very basic question that people used to ask about VR and 360, but why 360 underwater? Like, what is that value of the seeing in all directions underwater? And I know that this seems like a question from like multiple years ago, but I just want to make sure that we hit home with this particular one.
Yeah, I mean, from a storytelling perspective, you feel like you're diving if you have a headset and you have the right type of camera and image quality. I have put a number of headsets on, seeing some of my content, people are holding their breath because they've never been diving, they've never experienced what it is to
My
be.
first 360 video I ever watched was actually an Antarctic underwater one.
Oh, was it
Uh, oh, I mean, the
maybe the
second
David
one,
Attenborough one?
yeah, it was so, and then the second one was in a prison, and it was the prison one that actually convinced me to switch careers. I don't know what that says about me, but those are the only two that I watched. And so right when I heard that I would be talking to you, I was like, I remember that one. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, the access to experience is inspiring, right? And we want to drive people to change, to have empathy, to choose a career around the ocean that, and they may see the ocean in a different way by being in it, which, a headset offers a low cost, risk-free way to do that. From an industrial perspective, and just from a sheer dollars and cents, most robots only have one perspective, and it's the front. They don't see the sides, they don't see the back. They may need to strafe a wall, they may need to see below them, they may need to capture more data at an accelerated rate through a space so they don't have to make multiple trips. And just more sensors at the end of the day are better. It's not even an argument. It just comes down to cost and payload and, other factors. But if you give the option of giving someone a full 360 view or just one view, everyone's going to choose 360.
It reminds me of sort of
Yeah.
like sharks just looking ahead and keep on moving ahead, and they're missing everything. They're kind of missing everything else, and like they're good, but they're not. It's not human-based advanced technology. There's the difference. So what is the next step if you're predicting going into the future, looking into the future? What should people be expecting to come, since you know this back and forth? So what's next, Casey?
Oh man. So the robotics industry in all domains is fragmented, and there's a lot of cost that goes into building, a specific robot, and not a lot of transferability between intelligence or sensors or capabilities. And so one of them is just having more universal intelligence like ChatGPT or controls so that you can build, lower cost robots that have the same performance in different environments and with different form factors. And I think VideoRay does that quite well. We have something called the mission specialist, which is the concept of modularity and universality in our components, that we can reconfigure them to create different types of vehicles. And so we have a whole product line where right now we have the Defender and we have the Ally, and then a product roadmap for other types of vehicles. So I think that one is just having more horizontal kind of transferability and less fragmentation around different types of robots. The other one is better teleoperation, hands-free control. It's just hard. It takes a lot of training, and it's not something that everyone has the competency to do. And you would rather, instead of having your hands on the controls, you'd rather talk to it like a human, and rather have a conversation and let it make some of the more complex decisions while you're, what, quote unquote, supervising it or in the loop. Neural nets, GPUs, this type of like edge intelligence is really exciting, and certainly something that we're working on. But if autonomy is 20 years out, if full autonomy, tetherless autonomy is 20 years or more out, we do need to improve the teleoperation and remote operation experience. We do need to have better pilots in the loop that don't have to be on ships, that can stay at home, that can be paid well, but don't have to be away from their families. And I think you see companies like, Ocean Infinity and Oceaneering and others that are trying to solve for that, where there's just less people that are gone for 3 to 6 months at a time. And so being able to tie in human experts to complicated jobs where they can be more accessible across different projects at the same time is where we see this going. But I'm just mostly excited for robots behaving more like humans, and being able to interact with them, and not having them be dumb but just really smart.
Me too. I'm sort of excited about that kind of conversational interaction. So, Casey, if people want to know more about your company, where should they go?
I try to stay active on LinkedIn. I love the community that's been built there. I think the defense community is quite active, and obviously the startup community. And you can learn more about VideoRay at videoray.com. And I think that if you're interested in this topic, then I won't get tired of talking about it. And I'd love to, continue these conversations on the side for anyone who wants them.
Great. Thank you so much for coming to the Internet of Senses podcast site. And thank you everyone for listening or watching. This has been a great conversation. Hopefully everybody's learned a little bit more about seeing underwater. So thank you, Casey.
Samantha, it was a treat. Thank you for the time, and really glad we've gotten to meet and talk to you soon.